Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, after weeks of pressure from members of Congress, the head of Veterans Affairs, Eric Shinseki, resigns. Also, international outrage in response to Tuesday's so-called honor killings. We take a closer look at what those are and why they happen. And the upcoming release of Hillary Clinton's latest book. Does it signal a 2016 presidential bid? We'll have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, after weeks of pressure from members of Congress, the head of Veterans Affairs, Eric Shinseki, resigns. Also, international outrage in response to Tuesday's so-called honor killing. We take a closer look at what it is and why it happens. And the upcoming release of Hillary Clinton's latest book. Does it signal a 2016 presidential bid? We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, after weeks of pressure from members of Congress, the head of Veterans Affairs, Eric Shinseki, resigns. Also, international outrage in response to Tuesday's so-called honor killing. We take a closer look at what it is and why it happens. And the upcoming release of Hillary Clinton's latest book. Does it signal a 2016 presidential bid? We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast.
And to some extent, that would be a positive factor in the golf industry.
Well, you know, we'll have to see exactly what happens. Right now, I'm jumping for joy, but although a moment of silence for Golfsmith and other places like that. Actually,
Exactly.
let's surprise. Anyway, thanks so much for joining
Perfect
us.
topic for a Friday afternoon.
You got it. Next week on Arise Exchange, crisis and brand manager of the Stars, Trevor Julian, stops by on the Exchange on Monday. You've been watching Arise Exchange. Have a great, great day.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell. In the news today, after weeks of pressure from members of Congress, the head of Veterans Affairs, Eric Shinseki, resigns. Also, international outrage in response to Tuesday's so-called honor killing. We take a closer look at what it is and why it happens. And the upcoming release of Hillary Clinton's latest book. Does it signal a 2016 presidential bid? We will have that and a lot more right now on Arise America.
From coast to coast, every culture, every angle. This is Arise America.
Fallout continued today from the Veterans Affairs scandal. Eric Shinseki resigned on Friday as Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. This came after a meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama. The president announced the resignation and made this comment about Shinseki.
He has worked hard to investigate and identify the problems with access to care. But as he told me this morning, the VA needs new leadership to address them. He does not want to be a distraction because his priority is to fix the problem and make sure our vets are getting the care that they need.
When allegations of serious mismanagement came to light, Shinseki said he wanted to stay in his job and fix the problems, but anger reached a boiling point with the release this week of a preliminary report from the Inspector General's probe. It found that serious delays in medical care to veterans and the manipulation of records to hide those delays are systemic problems. The report also confirmed the allegations concerning treatment delays for 1,700 Phoenix area vets, which was at the core of the investigation. We will bring you more on this story later in the show. Meanwhile, in other U.S. news, federal authorities arrested 5 airline employees in a sting operation. They allegedly used their security clearances to smuggle more than $400,000 in cash through Boston's Logan International Airport. In the sting operation, a government agent told the airline employees that he was a drug trafficker trying to bypass security to transport cash from Boston to Florida. The 5 workers used their clearances as requested in exchange for payments from the undercover agent. Authorities arrested them on charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering and conspiracy to defraud the Transportation Safety Administration. If convicted, the men face up to 20 years each in prison. And SpaceX unveiled its next-generation space capsule designed to transport human travelers to the International Space Station. The Dragon version 2 is capable of carrying 7 people, landing on the ground with the accuracy of a helicopter, and docking with the space station directly. It's expected to be ready in 2017. And the ongoing measles outbreak in the United States has reached a record level. Since the infection was eliminated, there are 288 cases now reported in 18 states, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The largest measles clusters are in Ohio, with 138 confirmed cases. Also in the news, a judge has ordered attorneys for Ethan Couch to turn over his psychiatric records. You may remember that Couch's attorneys used the, quote, affluenza defense in the teen's trial for killing 4 people in a drunk driving case. They argued that Couch was coddled into a sense of irresponsibility by his wealthy parents. The family of a victim wants to use those records in a lawsuit against the teen's parents. And the National Basketball Association said Donald Sterling's wife notified league officials that she reached an agreement to sell the LA Clippers. The potential buyer is former Microsoft chief executive Steve Ballmer, who offered to pay a whopping $2 billion. NBA team owners must approve the sale and termination of Sterling's ownership. And there was another big resignation in Washington today. This one was quite unexpected. Arise News Washington correspondent Colin Campbell joins us from our nation's capital with more on this. Hi, Colin.
Hi, Debbie. Happy Friday. It was mostly unexpected for a lot of people, but not the president. There were some emotional sentences coming out of White House spokesperson Jay Carney's voice as he said that he would be stepping down from his position as spokesperson for the White House. Now, he had gone to President Obama back in April to discuss his resignation. The president said that he gave Carney his blessing, but somewhat reluctantly. Now, Carney will be replaced by a Deputy Secretary, Josh Earnest. Carney has been the White House spokesperson since 2011. Debbie?
Did Carney give any indication of where he might end up after this assignment?
Well, he didn't talk about anything in specificity, but he did say that there were conversations about where he would end up in the future, and he is happy about his prospects. He says that he'll step down sometime in mid-June, and he might give more of an indication of where he'll end up at that time.
Now, Colin, as we have learned, Republicans and Democrats in the House have united in passing an amendment to boost funding for the criminal background check system and gun reform. How is the Senate responding to this gun bill?
Well, so far, it looks like they will take up the measure later on. What's expected here is that they'll work on their own version of the legislation, and they'll pass something later on this year. And you can expect that, being that this is an election year, they'll be working on this very diligently so that there will be some legislation passed, especially since House Republicans have been working with Democrats to put some legislation together that will boost this funding. And the Senate definitely wants to follow suit to show that this is also a very important issue for them.
And give us an update on this latest decision by Medicare to provide financing for gender assignment surgery.
Yeah, this is something that was not really allowed up until now. This was almost a 3 decades old rule that people who wanted gender reassignment surgery would be denied if they were on Medicare. But this case follows a lawsuit from Denise Mallon. She is an Army veteran, 74 years old, and she decided that she wanted to have gender reassignment surgery. She was denied that surgery 2 years ago. She filed an appeal, and now the Department of Health and Human Services says she will be eligible to get gender reassignment surgery. Now, this isn't just a very easy process for those wishing to undergo this transformation. They would still have to go through the proper procedure and file the correct paperwork in order to get the reassignment surgery. But what this new ruling allows is that these candidates can be eligible for consideration. Debbie?
All right, Colin, thanks so much for the update. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
All right, you too. We'll see you next week. All right.
And still to come on Arise America, a look at honor killings, why beating to death a pregnant woman is still legal in many countries around the world. Also, will Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan's $120 million gift to San Francisco schools make a difference? And Aging with Grace, how walking can promote a long, healthy life.
Mainstream news has covered all of the issues of the world, which are like this, through a very narrow lens. And at Arise News, we do things different. We cover every culture, every angle. Our mission is to go to these places, to these communities, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Europe, Asia, the United States, the Caribbean. And we're going to find these stories, and we're going to tell them to our audience. Stories that they probably never heard of before, and stories that they'll find interesting and engaging.
We now have more on our top story today, the news that Veterans Affairs head Eric Shinseki has resigned. For more details on this story, we are joined by Rick Weidman in Washington, D.C. He is the Executive Director for Policy and Government Affairs for the Vietnam Veterans of America organization. Rick, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I do appreciate it. It seemed like that there was mixed sentiment about whether or not Eric Shinseki should resign. I heard a number of veterans that thought that he should, and a number that didn't see the need in that. Then in the report so far, there's no evidence that Shinseki nor his staff knew of the cover-up, particularly in Phoenix. So what does removing him from his post accomplish at this point?
Well, I think that the general saw that he had become a distraction with all the press going back and forth of should he go, should he stay. We did not call for his resignation because, quite frankly, the genesis of the problem of scheduling is not enough clinicians, that's the basic fact, to serve the number of needs. And particularly because the census, or the number of people who utilize VA, has risen by a million and a half over the last 3.5 years. And yet the staff has only gone up about 7% in terms of, and it's even lower if you just do those who are doing clinical work per se, in other words, direct hands-on care. So the basic situation is unchanged, if you will, and frankly, we're calling on the president in our press release this afternoon to take dramatic action, and we outlined some 14 steps that we believe are useful in terms of moving forward and making sure that America's veterans get the best care anywhere and that they have proper access in a timely way to quality care.
Rick, unfortunately, we don't have time for you to elucidate all 14 of those points, but can you take me through one or two of the recommendations that your organization has made to the president?
First off is right now you got a problem at many places where you have people in waiting lists who have not been thoroughly assessed on major diseases that may affect them based on their military service and based on their age. So what we propose and recommended to the president is he mobilize Guard and Reserve Hospital, mobile hospital units, and or FEMA hospital units to come in and do the screening to make sure that the people who are in line waiting for initial assessment don't have any of the 10 to 12 major killers of veterans within the VA system. That would be something that can happen as early as next week, and we believe should happen as early as next week. The second thing is rewriting everybody's job description, who's a supervisor on up to the network directors, that if job item number one, if you lie or cause subordinates to lie or falsify or don't tell the whole truth and you're reporting up the line, then you will be subject to immediate suspension and proceedings to dismiss. You've got to break this corporate culture where it's okay to lie, because it's not okay to lie. And frankly, Secretary Shinseki was such an honorable man, he couldn't believe that people would systemically and systematically lie to his face in an unblushing way. And the third major thing is redeploying clinical staff. You've got folks who were trained as clinicians, but now essentially are performing administrative work. What we need is more people to do the do. In other words, Congress had these huge increases between 2007 and FY 2007 and FY 2011, and reasonable increases since then to provide more service providers, is to hire more people to actually help care for veterans. And unfortunately, too much has gone into rather high-paying positions that don't add materially to the enterprise.
Rick, is this a matter of there is enough money allocated to the VA, but perhaps it's not used properly, as you've just alluded to, or there's not enough money allocated? It was just in February when Congress, 40 members of the GOP voted against a bill that would have expanded funding to Veterans Affairs. So is there enough money that needs to be spent better, or not enough money?
Well, it's both. That's not a simple answer, but we've been yelling about accountability and testifying to the Congress for the last 15 years straight that we need greater accountability on how the money is used. Yes, we need more money. And currently, we recommend that they seek an emergency appropriation of 2-year money, it's called, for health care. And part of it to expand the organizational capacity of clinicians at VA hospitals, and part of it is to buy care on the open market, if you will. In other words, purchase care from private providers until they can build up the organizational capacity. But the accountability has to go hand in hand with the increase in dollars.
We'll have to leave it right there for now. Rick Weidman, thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you.
And it's time now to take a look at other news capturing headlines around the globe in our Arise News World Wrap. Syrian refugees in Lebanon flooded the streets to protest the upcoming Syrian presidential elections on June 3rd. President Bashar al-Assad is expecting to easily win a third 7-year term in what the protesters are calling a bogus election. Just days earlier, expatriate supporters of the regime voted enthusiastically for Assad at Syrian embassies around the world. In Thailand, military coup leaders deployed more soldiers into the streets of Bangkok to silence protesters. They announced Friday that it could take up to 1 year to set up a general election. That time is needed, they say, to achieve reconciliation between political factions and to establish other reforms. The military launched a coup last week to end 6 months of political upheaval. And more than 150 runners from around the world participated in the world's highest marathon, that is on the foothills of Mount Everest. A local man won the race in 3 hours and 42 minutes. This annual event marks the anniversary of Edmund Hillary and his Sherpa guide reaching the summit of Mount Everest. And that is the Arise News World Wrap. The stoning death of a pregnant woman this week in the heart of Lahore, one of Pakistan's biggest cities, sent shockwaves of outrage around the world because the killing was done all in the name of so-called honor. The 25-year-old with her husband when her father and relatives ambushed the couple in broad daylight. Her husband's cousin says the relentless attack was premeditated.
They were about 30 or 35 people. They suddenly attacked us. The girl was with us. She was 3 months pregnant. When they caught her, we struggled with them, but they fired a shot. Then they dragged her there and hit her with bricks. A couple of bricks hit her in the brain.
The couple had eloped in January against the consent of the bride's family. In retribution, her father committed what is called an honor killing. In Pakistan, one human rights group says more than 1,000 women in that country are killed each year. According to the United Nations, honor killings are a lot more common than one would expect. The killings have been reported in at least 20 countries, even including developed nations like the United States, Canada, and Sweden. Dr. Shahul Gabai teaches about the Muslim world at Korbel School of International Studies at the University of Denver, and he joins us from Denver, Colorado. Dr. Gabai, welcome to Arise America, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I think for most of us, particularly that were born and raised in America and in a Western culture, we have no comprehension of the rationale behind a so-called honor killing. Can you explain the cultural thinking behind this act?
There's no question that this tragic event has to be condemned, as well as the many thousands which take place every year in the Muslim world and in the Arab world, as well as you pointed, in the Western world. To understand where does this come from, we need to really understand the pyramid of norms and values, which are very different in Western societies as opposed to the eastern part, the Muslim world, which is we put at the top of the value pyramid life. We would preserve life at any cost. In that part of the world, the most important value is honor. And the derivative of the shattering of the honor, the derivative of the decrease of honor of a family, which could go for generations forward, is the norm of possibly killing a person for deviation from the norm of the family or of the society at large.
And what then is gained by the killing? How does that restore honor, if you will?
We have to understand that the promise of a bride to, in particularly, a cousin, which is very prevalent in the Muslim world, in Pakistan in particular, and in Pakistani families all throughout the world, even in England, this is an act of trust between two families, which in many ways has also economic ramifications, namely to keep the value of the assets within the family. Once this is taking place, and sometimes it's even when the children are 13 years old, this is a commitment for generations that these two individuals will create the families and move forward in terms of the development of the family network forward. If this is shattered, then the whole issue of trust, the honor, the name, the particular promise that was shattered, all of this affects not just the family, the immediate family, but also the other circles, the cousins of the cousins, till it comes to the society at large. And therefore, the restoration of the honor is not just a prerogative, it's a responsibility of the heads of the family, because it will have an effect for generations forward.
I understand everything that you just said, but you also said that there is an economic component in this particular case. This young woman who was 3 months pregnant, who was killed, as I understand it, it's reported that her husband and she were offered the opportunity to pay the equivalent of $1,000 US, I believe 100,000 rupees, to avoid this retribution. They could not pay, and so therefore she was killed. So what does that have to do with honor?
Well, first of all, even when you go 1,000 years back, you understand that sometimes there is what is called blood money. Even if a tribal individual is killed by a tribe, there is a responsibility for killing someone from my tribe. But this could be offset by what is called blood money. We have to also remember we are not sure about the details that come out from this particular story. This is a very, very intimate phenomena that happens within the confinement of a very small group of individuals. To ascertain what really happened and what really took place in terms of the money situation is very difficult. However, it is prevalent that in some situations money could offset the possibility of shattering and restores the honor. We also have to remember that $1,000 in that part of the world, particularly for a very poor family, has a different connotation, has a different effect than $1,000 as we perceive it here in the West and the United States in particular.
Absolutely. I think everybody would agree $1,000 is a significant amount of money. I'm all out of time, Dr. Gobai, but I just want to ask you, can you recite off the top of your head the proportion of women that are the victims of these honor killings as opposed to men?
It's almost 90% that it is against women, and of course it is a mirror of the status of women in a patriarchal society where men take the most important positions, where men take the most important positions even within the family. The place of a woman is very different than the place which is the way that we perceive the place of women as an equivalent to a man in a Western society.
You've explained it very well, but it's still very hard to understand. Dr. Shaul Gobai, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Arise America.
If I was building my own news network, I think I'd want broad, in-depth knowledge of important issues throughout the world.
I would want to recruit a fairly diverse staff that had different life experiences before they came to news.
We want to see how we can help ourselves and help benefit other people, not just see what's up with the celebrities and where they're going and traveling and buying this and buying that.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan recently expressed concern about the need for better schools in Silicon Valley's backyard, and today they did something about it. The couple is donating $120 million to the San Francisco Bay Area's public school system. They determined the most urgent needs based on discussions with school administrators and local leaders. According to the reports, the first $5 million will go to school districts in San Francisco, Ravenwood, and Redwood City. Among other things, it will support principal training and classroom technology. This isn't a new project for Zuckerberg. Several years ago, he donated $100 million to help the Newark, New Jersey school system. Critics, though, say that money was spent without achieving any tangible improvements. Andre Perry is the Dean of Urban Education at Davenport University, and he has some insight on the lessons learned in the Newark case. And he joins us from Washington, D.C. Andre, welcome to Arise America. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to talk about what we've seen happen with this $100 million, as Zuckerberg called it, challenge grant that was given to the Newark public schools or the Newark school system to understand what might happen with this $120 million. So I want to start off by asking you, because the city had to match that $100 million, how much money have they actually received and where has it gone?
Well, and that's a question that a lot of people are still asking, because it's always hard to ascertain how much money a state government is actually putting into a system on top of what they are already supposed to give. Not only was the state and the city supposed to match, but other philanthropers and other givers are supposed to give. And it's difficult to ascertain because there's such a big hole in the educational system in terms of what is actually needed. The cost to rehabilitate a system is so deep that a particular amount is not necessarily going to achieve many of the goals set forth in the match grant. But we do know that the city and the state contributed upwards of $20 million, but it is unknown what impact that money had in relation to the match that Zuckerberg challenged them to give.
According to a very exhaustive article that was written in the New Yorker, 4 years later, it says there are 50 new principals, 4 new public high schools, new teachers contract that ties pay to performance, and an agreement by most charter schools to serve their share of neediest students. But is there any measurable improvement of student performance since the allocation of this money to Newark?
Again, I don't want to sound vague, but it's very difficult to ascertain improvement in the course of 4 years. Typically, improvement is seen over a longer period of stretch, 10 years even, 10, 15 years. Learning how to read, for instance, is not just a year or 2 year endeavor. It's a lifelong endeavor. And so you really can't measure improvement. And so with that said, under the conventional means to measure achievement, it has not proven successful. But I have always argued that you really don't see the impact of reform until much later on in life, and you actually should measure lifelong outcomes like employability, college graduation, the ability to own a home. All of those things you won't see until much later, but as you know, people want to see improvement ASAP, and so unfortunately those type of gains you can't see and you have not seen in relation to the gift.
There are some limitations to what money can do to any situation, but certainly to some of the tough challenges that are faced in school systems like Newark's. What are some of those limitations, and how then do we as a society address them in an effective manner?
You know, people hear $100 million and they think that's a large sum of money, but when you're talking about the size of a school district of Newark, you're talking about $1 billion budget, but more importantly, you're talking about an entire community that's been suffering for decades. And so $100 million to a school is really not even a scratch. So the questions of where has the money gone, again, like I said earlier, there is such a hole in terms of community wellness where $100 million really doesn't do much in terms of restoring a community. Because remember, we're not trying to improve a school as much as we're trying to improve a community. Schools are just a means to an end of improving a community. And so schools only reflect what's happening in the community. So one of the main problems in Newark is people are out of work, they're not contributing to the tax base, and it's not, they're not enabled to fund schools. And so $100 million is simply not going to give people jobs to create the tax generation that will give at least the resources. But then on top of that, you've got to make people whole. People have to be a part of the development. And I think what's been a mistake in reform is that people wanted to clear away the old system, people, principles, But unfortunately, people just don't go away. You just can't press delete. People are still there. So the wiser move, the more sustainable move, is to develop people. But that just takes longer. It's harder. People don't want to deal with the frustrations of trying to develop a workforce. But ultimately, that's the right way to go. But unfortunately, reform has taken on this mantle of replace and change.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there for now. Dr. Andre Perry, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, there's a lot of speculation about whether Hillary Clinton will run for president. She would bring a wide range of experience to the White House. In addition to serving as U.S. Senator, Hillary Clinton traveled to the capitals of the world as the nation's top diplomat. We've known her for a long time. She stepped onto the national stage as the First Lady and famously said she decided to fulfill her profession rather than staying at home to bake cookies. Well, earlier I spoke with Alexander Bolton, a senior staff writer for The Hill newspaper, and I asked him about the possibility of former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton making a bid for the White House in 2016. So, Alex, everybody has been speculating, frankly, since she ran in 2008, whether or not she would run again in 2016. Got a book coming out. We just learned that she had a private lunch with Barack Obama. So what do you see that tells you that Hillary Clinton might, in fact, be running for president in 2016?
Well, there are so many signs. You just look at the staff, that the former Clintonites around her who are gearing up, putting together this Ready for Hillary PAC. Tommy Vitor, a former spokesman for the Obama administration, National Security Council, is going to be handling the Democratic response to the Republican attacks over Benghazi. So it shows that she is already gearing up a war room, and war rooms are used for campaigns. And that's just another piece of evidence that she's going to run. And if she didn't, it would come as a major surprise to Democrats because they don't have a backup at this point.
Oh, so that's so interesting that you think that she's the foregone conclusion now. It's just a matter of an announcement.
It would be a shock if she didn't run. The only question lingering is her health. And the only reason Democrats think that she wouldn't run is if something unexpected happened with her health. But she has assured people that her health is solid, and her husband has done so too. Karl Rove recently, the Republican strategist, raised some questions as to whether she suffered a traumatic brain injury as a result of an illness. Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton have pushed back against that very strongly.
You know, of course, this book is coming out in early June, June 10th, I do believe, and very often a presidential candidate releases a book immediately preceding their announcement for candidacy for the presidency. So there's also that clue. But is this tradition of putting this book out, is this her way of framing preemptively the conversation specifically about Benghazi?
Absolutely. It's a way for her to respond to the Republican attacks before they happen on the campaign trail. That way, when they're launched, she can say, I addressed this in my book. And she has a 34-page chapter that was just leaked discussing her view of Benghazi. She explains that she ordered an investigation of the attacks 9 days after they happened. She implemented the recommendations of a review board. So she's making the argument now that she's done everything to get to the bottom of what happened on that tragic night.
And of course, there's much that's been made. She said that she's not going to go before the Senate committee to testify again about this Benghazi, and people have seen that as a definite sign that she's going to run. Reading what has been leaked about what she said about this tragedy in Benghazi, is it enough to satisfy the critics or answer the questions?
It won't be enough to satisfy the critics. They're going to keep on pushing this because they know that this is her biggest political vulnerability. It's the only scandal they can peg on her, and she is taking the offensive by attacking her critics in the book and saying that they are a broken record. They keep on recycling the same attacks and that they are politicizing this issue on the backs of dead Americans. So she's trying to put her Republican critics on the defensive.
You know, Alex, you did say very aptly that the only unanswered question is of course, her health. And Karl Rove made that an issue, probably to his regret, a few weeks ago. However, there are some real reasons that perhaps she shouldn't or perhaps wouldn't run, not the least of which is whatever baggage that comes from her husband's presidency. Monica Lewinsky, of course, popped up into the public conversation just about a month or so ago. So are there some sustainable, real reasons for not running?
I think the only real reason for her not to run is if it would appear that she doesn't have a chance of winning. If she falls so far in the polls that it looks like she couldn't win. That's the only thing that would change her trajectory. But right now, the polls show that she's very strong. She's popular. The Clinton name, Republicans say, will be baggage. Again, Karl Rove popped up again recently saying that Hillary Clinton is stale. This is old news. People want a fresh face. But I think after so many years of economic turmoil, people look back to the Clinton years with fond memories. They want to get back to that thriving economic growth that characterized the country in the 90s.
Yeah, nonetheless, if we can all go back to when she was First Lady Hillary Clinton, she was then a polarizing figure. She can be now a polarizing figure, and she was not necessarily popular among women, particularly stay-at-home mothers. Remember, she made that famous statement that she's not like Tammy Wynette standing by her man baking cookies.
Right.
And she burned a few bridges with women back then. Do you think that she's served and lived past that, or will she have to court women to get their vote?
I think she's going to do very well amongst women. She's going to make the argument that her candidacy is about making history, breaking the glass ceiling, and so I think that women won't be her problem. I think the bigger problem will be turning out younger voters who I think could gravitate to a candidate like Rand Paul, who's the Republican libertarian. He's more lax on the social issues. He's trying to win the younger voters over. A lot of young people aren't doing so well in this bad economy, and so they might be more willing to give Republicans a second look. But I think women will be solidly behind Clinton, as will Hispanics, because it looks like immigration reform is going nowhere in this Congress.
Very, very interesting. And what lessons do you think that she should take from the first time she ran for president against Barack Obama in the primary in leading up to the 2008 election? What lessons should she learn and do better this go around? Should she run?
I think two lessons. The number one lesson is don't take anything for granted. I think she took that race against Obama for granted. There's a great example where her campaign did not fully understand how the delegate apportionment worked and how important the caucuses would be in that 2008 race. They just didn't read the instructions that closely before the contest. So that shows that she was taking a little bit for granted. The other mistake she made was she didn't reveal enough about herself. She jumped in the polls before the New Hampshire primary when she shed that tear at that constituents meeting. And when that humanized her, voters responded. She entered the race trying to portray herself as almost a Margaret Thatcher type figure, an iron lady who's ready to be commander-in-chief. That's not what voters responded to. They responded to Hillary Clinton, the woman, the person. So she's going to have to reveal more of herself this time around.
All right, Alex Bolton reading the tea leaves for us. Thanks so much. And it's good to have you in our New York studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, we all know that exercise is good for your health, but there's been limited scientific evidence about its benefits to the elderly until now. One of the largest and longest running studies shows that regular exercise, including walking, significantly reduces the chance that a frail older person will become physically disabled. This new study appears in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Dr. Marco Pahor is the director of the Institute on Aging at the University of Florida and the lead author of the study, and he joins us by phone from Gainesville, Florida. Dr. Pahor, thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So will you just sort of parse out what you learned in this study in addition to what we all consider to be conventional wisdom, and that is that exercise is good for us? What did you learn beyond that?
Well, I had this question several times. Is really a new exercise study needed while there is so much evidence that physical activity or exercise is good in many ways for virtually everyone? Well, the evidence we had was pretty limited based on major outcomes, such as definitive outcomes, such as being or not being able to walk. I mean, we know that physical activity, for example, improves strength, improves walking speed, increases physical performance measures. But all these studies were based on smaller sample size, short-term, or trials, or on epidemiologic studies. Really, definitive evidence whether a person engaging into a structured program of physical activity over long term can prevent or avert or reduce the risk of being unable to walk was lacking. And there was quite much of equipoise in this respect, because we know older people are also more prone to falls, may experience adverse events, and until definitive evidence is not there, we don't know what is a balance between risk and benefit.
And as I understand it, what was also significant about the study, how you conducted it, was not that you looked at older people who were normally active, but also included people who had stated that they were sedentary. Why was that important?
Well, we had two key criteria for entry in the study. First, people had to be sedentary, which means not engaging into any structured physical activity for more than 20 minutes per week. And also, they had to be at high risk of being disabled in the next couple of years. And typically, those people are frail, are not included in large studies, and are understudied. We really didn't have much evidence in this type of population on long-term studies. So this, in this respect, the LIFE study, the study we are talking about, is a pretty unique study.
So what's the next step then for your research? What do you do with this information to move forward?
Well, there are several aspects we need to continue to research. First, to look at the longer-term follow-up and long-term hospitalizations, cost-effectiveness of this intervention after we have completed the study. Also, it would be important to implement it in a general community, and in this respect, for more broader implementation, it would be important that healthcare organizations and insurance organizations such as Medicare would reimburse and support this type of intervention.
We're going to have to stop it right there, but congratulations on your work. This is important information. Dr. Marco Pahor, thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And you're watching Arise America.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms, just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
We turn now to Nigeria. Following Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan's vow to defeat Boko Haram terrorists, there's news of a targeted attack. The group reportedly gunned down an important leader as they continue their rampage through northeast Nigeria. For more on this story, we turn to Arise NewsHour Charles Aniagolu. I spoke to him earlier from the capital of Nigeria, Abuja. Charles, it's another day and more rounds of violence at the hands of Boko Haram. Give us the latest.
Well, Debbie, the latest is basically that this morning at around 8 a.m. GMT, a very important traditional ruler known as the Emir of Gwazo was traveling in a convoy with two other emirs that were going to attend a funeral in the northeast of Nigeria. And they were ambushed by Boko Haram fighters, well, suspected Boko Haram fighters, who opened fire on his car and killed him instantly. The other two emirs managed to jump out of the car into the bush, and for a time the people thought they had been kidnapped, but eventually they surfaced unharmed. So basically that's the latest. Boko Haram has struck again, and struck at the heart of the community, because this is a very important local traditional Islamic ruler, and in a community that borders Cameroon. So I think it underscores the fragility of the situation and the fact that every time the president speaks, and he spoke yesterday about launching an all-out assault, Boko Haram reply with a very loud, very aggressive retort. And that's precisely what they've done today.
Yeah, that's a tragedy, and it's an irony as well, considering the strong stance that President Goodluck Jonathan seemed to take yesterday. Is there any continued reaction then to the president's address to the nation yesterday? Any calls for specific action in addition to this promised so-called all-out assault?
Well, the Christian Association of Nigeria were the first to argue that basically that what the president is doing is not the right approach. I mean, there have been a number of voices as well within the community that have expressed concern, first of all, about the fact that he's talking about going to launch an all-out assault, particularly with the very delicate situation of the Chibok girls, still, still under the sort of the control of Boko Haram. So that people are sort of commenting on that. But I think also in many people feel that the president is in some ways a bit of a toothless bulldog, that he talks about things but cannot follow them up. And these recent killings, one a couple of days ago on the same morning that he spoke, and now this attack on the Emir of Gwaza seem to underscore those points, and many people in this country will feel that that battle is slowly being lost against Boko Haram.
In the meantime, Charles, as I understand it, there is another security meeting coming up in Ghana. Tell us what will be the goal and who will be the participants in this one.
Yes, that's the sort of the regional summit of African sort of heads of states that's been called by the Ghanaian president, and the idea is to try to discuss regional cooperation to battle things like Boko Haram in Nigeria and sort of the sort of Mali insurgency as well. Part of it is in response to a call that the president of Nigeria has made several times, saying that the only way to battle groups like Boko Haram is to regionalize the military cooperation as well as all other efforts, intelligence sharing and all that sort of thing. And I think all the other countries are slowly becoming aware that this is no longer just a Nigerian problem, and unless they do something about it fairly quickly, it could well spread into other countries. And so that's the thrust of this meeting today in Ghana.
Have you been hearing, one final thing before it's time to go, any, with your sources and contacts that you have, any information about whether or not there are in fact back channel talks, negotiations trying to get the release of these girls?
Well, we can't know for sure because the government suggests that whatever they're doing, they've got to be very careful in terms of what information is released to the public. That was why, of course, the statement made by the Chief of Defense Staff a few days ago about knowing where the girls are incurred the wrath of the president and also the criticism from the international community. So for the moment, we don't know anything that's going on for sure beyond the fact that there've been some talk of back channels being opened to try and reach out to these people, but it's also very cautious because Boko Haram have disappointed the government several times when the government reached out to them. And I think that they're being very careful and also very wary that they might move a step too fast and, some terrible harm could come to those girls.
Yeah, that is indeed the concern. We'll stop right there for now. Reporting for us from Abuja, Rise News Hour anchor Charles Aniagolu. Thank you, Charles. It's time now to take a look at this week's headline-making stories in our Reporters Rewind. Our guests at the round table are South African freelance journalist Sarusha Govinder, and Milton Alamadi is the publisher and editor-in-chief at the Black Star News. And finally, freelance journalist Nicholas Niarchos is to my left. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to all of you. You've all been at this table before. I want to start with this tragic shooting allegedly at the hands of Elliot Rodger, this isolated young man who clearly had mental illness, set out to get revenge for his lack of a social life, and as we all know, stabbed his 3 roommates and then killed 3 other people in a shooting rampage. My question, or what I'd like for us to discuss, is, as journalists, do we somehow get it wrong by making these mass shooters infamous by, mining through their background, telling their life story. We make them famous, and sometimes that's what they're going for, don't you think?
Well, I think the operative word there is sometimes. I don't think we can account for all mass shootings, in terms of people wanting to make themselves famous. Sometimes there's a fascination with weaponry, regalia, war stories. So I'm not sure if we can necessarily draw that causal link between someone wanting to become famous, infamous, and them going out to shoot people. I think that what's needed is kind of clear-headed, thorough reporting that looks at the causes of these things and doesn't obviously make them into sort of famous or celebrity type figures.
No, I agree completely. You see that as these things get reported on initially, it snowballs into these bigger stories, and then you get good reporting and bad reporting. And good reporting we've seen come out of these mass shootings is bringing up the big issues again of gun violence, and particularly in this case, misogyny and the Yes All Women hashtag and all the violence against women that a lot of these acts involve. Those are important points that the media is tasked with bringing up, is tasked with discussing. It is unfortunate that the smaller media or some other media will also sort of cotton onto this and exploit certain factors, but we can't say all media shouldn't report at all on these.
Yeah, it's really tough when it's a shooting like this, a lot of people dead. I don't see how, it's important to put it in some context, but when you're on deadline, you want the story for the next day, and that establishes the tone, unfortunately, the initial reporting. But in this young man's situation, I'm thinking like, how many young people, young men, are in that kind of situation right now? So I'm very concerned, actually. And then when it comes to mental illness, I think we're getting to that stage where we may need a national conversation on mental illness.
Oh, I think you're more than right on that. But I draw my question from, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember her name, but she lost her son and her father in the shooting, in the anti-Semitic shooting in the Kansas City area. And when we interviewed her, she refused to say the name of the shooter. She only wanted to focus on her family. And I thought, there's a certain dignity to that. And there's, to me, a certain rationale to that. Why should we focus on the perpetrator of the crime instead of the victims, the people who lost their lives?
As we saw in Elliott's case, when the shooter actually posts online, on YouTube, statements like that, I think that's going to become an increasing trend as well. And that also drives the quality or lack of quality of the coverage that
And here's the thing, I challenge any of you, we can all say the alleged shooter's name, give me a name of any of the other victims. And there were 6. And so that's an interesting point. We always focus on well, we're almost out of time, but let's talk a little bit about Edward Snowden. He granted a big, highly hyped interview this week to NBC News anchor Brian Williams. And I'm just wondering, are you over Snowden? I know, Sarusha, you watched some of it. Did you change your opinion? Did you learn anything?
I think that interview was so overhyped. It was almost comical the way it was played out, like a big look at what Snowden really has to say. And I think people still really want to know really what he thinks and really what he says, and I don't think we got any of that from this interview. It seemed almost by rote. It seemed like Brian Williams didn't push him at all, and he had lots of caveats in between where he said, well, Snowden actually did this and meant that, but he didn't say it in the actual interview. He didn't call him on questions. He didn't answer. So I was just left feeling really unsatisfied and a little bit led on by the coverage.
We just have a few seconds. Go ahead, Milton.
Okay, well, I can say this. I think the tide has changed a little. There was a time where everybody wanted to talk about lynch this character. I think when you now have him doing primetime interview like this, it shows us how far we've pushed from that initial situation.
And finally, Nicholas.
Well, I think the fact that he's still releasing information makes him a relevant figure in all of our lives. And I think that there are still many things about the NSA that I want to know. I'm not sure if I find Edward Snowden himself particularly fascinating, but his information is definitely something
I think
that we
you
should
make
be
a good point. I think the government also wants to know how much more he has.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know what the ratings were for that interview, but I'd be curious to know. We'll have to leave it right there. Sarusha Govinder, Milton Alamati.
Thank you as always.
Thank you so
much. Good
much.
to see all of you.
Thanks.
Have a good weekend. And you're watching Arise America.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
There's some breaking news to tell you about embattled Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling. It's been reported that he plans to file an antitrust lawsuit against the NBA. Sterling is seeking $1 billion. The goal of this lawsuit is to seek damages from the league for his lifetime ban and the termination of his ownership. As we reported earlier, this comes after former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer agreed to buy the team for $2 billion. And now it's Friday night at the movies, and here to tell us what is good and what to avoid is Arise contributor and editor-in-chief of ShowBizCafe.com, Jack Rico. Hey,
How are
Jack.
you? Hey.
I'm good. I'm always happy to see you. End of the week, end of the day, end of the show. So a couple of really interesting movies that I think they're going to do well.
Okay.
So let's start with Million Ways to Die in the West.
Yeah, you're already laughing, right? Well, you know, a lot of people are going to be laughing for different reasons because this movie just doesn't match the expectations of what Seth MacFarlane was providing. Now, everybody knows Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy. He did the voice of Ted, also directed that film. And he was the host of the Oscars last year. So this is his debut as an actor, and he decided to do a Western comedy, which is probably a genre that is the least successful probably in the history of film. And in this particular case, he has Charlize Theron, who stars with him. She walks into town and somehow allows this very shy cowboy to find his strength.
All right, here's A Million Ways to Die in the West.
The American West is a terrible place in time. Everything out here that's not you wants to kill you. Angry drunk people, hungry animals, outlaws. Oh, the f***ing doctor.
I couldn't save her.
She had a splinter. Doc, what the hell were you supposed to do?
I would like to welcome a new member to our community.
Welcome to our awesome town.
What's with this fair?
Every year, people die.
Really?
Everybody hold still.
Hold still! People die at the fair.
People die at the fair.
Well, Jack, the crew is laughing.
I know, the crew is laughing. And now this is the story of two tales. It looks like Seth MacFarlane brought half an hour of great comic material for a 2-hour movie. You do the math there, and there's an hour and a half that you're kind of just rolling your eyes and maybe even yawning a little bit. Here's the problem with this. With R-rated comedies, it's either all out funny or you just can't have a little bit of funny. You gotta have all out funny, and unfortunately it gives you the occasional laughs. It's a little bit offensive. It makes fun of people with Parkinson's disease, minorities and everything. And so those are the things that you're kind of like, are we still here?
Okay.
Can't we just move forward with that?
All right, so if you don't like it, let's move on to the other one.
Let's move on to the other one.
Let's not give it any more time because we're almost out of
exactly.
time. So, Maleficent.
Angelina Jolie comes back. Her little daughter's part of the film. She wanted to do this movie for her family, for her kids. It is just fantastic. It's the Disney take on Sleeping Beauty, but from the witch's perspective. And I really enjoyed that take.
All right, let's take a look at Maleficent.
Well, well. I shall bestow a gift on the child.
Before the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she will fall into a sleep like death
This movie fits Angelina Jolie like a ring on her hand. It is just fantastic the way she performs here. She's phenomenal. The visual effects in 3D are great. Now, parents should not take kids who are 7 or younger because there's some very scary scenes here. But this one's for the whole family.
Visually, it looks
visually,
very
it's just fantastic. So I recommend this for everybody.
All right, there you go, Jack.
All right,
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.
That's going to do it for us. You have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday on Rise America. Bye-bye.